The mining planet of Cryo 7 was a place of endless ice and silence. Thick storms of snow moved across the frozen ground like slow white ghosts. The temperature was so cold that even metal could crack. No one lived there by choice. Only miners stayed on Cryo 7, digging deep under the ice to find rare crystals that powered ships across the galaxy. Among those miners was a quiet human named Daniel Carter. Daniel worked long shifts alone in Tunnel 19, one of the deepest mining tunnels on the planet. The tunnel walls were thick blue ice mixed with black stone. Large machines drilled into the frozen ground, while yellow lights flickered along the narrow path. Most miners hated working alone. But Daniel did not mind the silence. After years in space, he had learned that quiet places were sometimes the safest. Still, Cryo 7 had a strange feeling. Some miners believed the planet was cursed. Others said strange signals sometimes appeared on scanners, then vanished without explanation. But the mining company never cared about rumors. As long as the crystals kept coming, the work continued. One night, during the middle of his shift, Daniel was cutting through a thick wall of ice with his laser drill. The bright beam slowly melted the frozen surface, sending small pieces of ice sliding onto the ground. Suddenly, Daniel stopped. He heard something. At first, he thought it was only the wind moving through the ventilation pipes. But then he heard it again. A soft sound. A weak cry. Daniel frowned. He turned off the laser drill and listened carefully. The tunnel became silent. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the sound returned. A small, trembling cry. It sounded like a child. Daniel felt a cold chill run down his back. Children were never allowed on mining planets. Cryo 7 was too dangerous. The company rules were strict. Only trained adult workers were allowed to land here. So how could a child possibly be inside the ice? Daniel slowly walked toward the wall where the sound was coming from. He pressed his gloved hand against the frozen surface. There it was again, a faint cry, trapped somewhere behind the ice. "That's impossible," Daniel whispered to himself. Still, the sound was real. He quickly picked up his scanning tool and ran it across the wall. The scanner beeped softly. A strange reading appeared on the small screen. Unknown life form detected. Daniel's eyes widened. Unknown life form? That had never happened before. His heart began to beat faster. Carefully, Daniel aimed his laser drill at the ice again. This time he worked slowly, melting the frozen wall layer by layer. Chunks of ice fell to the ground as the hole became deeper. Then suddenly, the drill beam hit something hard. Not stone. Not ice, metal. Daniel stopped immediately and cleared the area with his gloves. Hidden inside the thick ice was a small metallic pod. The object was smooth and silver, covered with strange glowing symbols that Daniel had never seen before. It did not look human. It looked alien. Daniel stared at it in shock. The pod was about the size of a small suitcase, but there was a transparent window at the top, and inside the pod, something moved. Daniel felt his breath stop. Slowly, he wiped the frost away from the glass. What he saw made his mind go completely silent. Inside the pod was a small alien child. She looked no older than 5 years old. Her skin had a faint blue glow, and thin silver lines moved gently across her arms like living light. Her eyes were closed, and her body looked weak and frozen. But she was alive. The crying sound was coming from her. Daniel stepped back in disbelief. "How did you get here?" he whispered. Cryo 7 was a remote mining world far from major space routes. No alien ships had been reported near the planet for years. Yet somehow, this strange pod had been trapped deep inside the ice, and now a living alien child was inside it. Daniel looked around the empty tunnel. No one else was there. No cameras. No supervisors. Just silence. He knew what would happen if the mining company discovered this pod. They would report it to the Galactic Authority immediately. Scientists would arrive. The child would be taken away, studied, tested, maybe even treated like an experiment. Daniel looked at the small alien girl again. Her tiny hands slowly moved against the glass. She was still crying softly, weak, scared, alone. Daniel felt something heavy in his chest. For a long moment, he stood there thinking. Then he made a decision. A decision that would soon shock the entire galaxy. Daniel carefully lifted the frozen pod out of the ice and quietly carried it toward his mining cabin. He had no idea who the child was. He had no idea why she was here, but one thing was certain. From this moment forward, everything was about to change. The frozen wind howled outside Daniel Carter's small mining cabin. Cryo 7 was never quiet for long. Even when the sky looked calm, the planet's icy storms moved like angry spirits across the empty land. Thick snow crashed against the metal walls of the cabin while the temperature outside dropped lower and lower. Inside the cabin, yellow lights flickered softly. Daniel placed the strange metallic pod carefully on the small metal table in the center of the room. Frost still covered its smooth silver surface, and the glowing alien symbols continued to pulse faintly like a slow heartbeat. For several seconds, Daniel simply stood there staring at it. A few hours ago, his life had been normal. Just another long mining shift, just another quiet night on a lonely planet. Now there was an alien child inside his cabin. He slowly removed his heavy gloves and wiped the frost from the glass window again. The small alien girl was still inside the pod. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing looked weak but steady. The faint blue glow on her skin softly lit the inside of the container. Daniel opened his toolbox and pulled out a small scanner. "Let's see what you are," he muttered quietly. He moved the scanner across the pod. The machine beeped as it tried to analyze the strange technology. The screen flashed several warnings: unknown material, unknown energy source, unknown language detected. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I figured that," he said. The pod clearly wasn't human technology. It looked far more advanced than anything the mining company used. Whoever built it had knowledge far beyond normal space travel systems. Then something changed. One of the glowing symbols on the pod suddenly turned bright. The pod made a soft clicking sound. Daniel quickly stepped back. A thin line of light appeared across the center of the pod. Then the lid slowly opened. Cold air escaped from inside like a cloud of white mist. Daniel held his breath. The small alien girl inside moved slightly. Her fingers twitched weakly, and her glowing skin flickered like soft blue fire. After a moment, her eyes slowly opened. They were bright silver. For a second, the girl looked confused. Her small head moved slowly as she looked around the strange room. Then her eyes stopped on Daniel. The human and the alien stared at each other in complete silence. Daniel slowly raised his hands, trying to show he was not dangerous. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe." Of course, she could not understand his words, but something in his voice seemed to calm her. The girl tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. She slipped slightly and almost fell out of the pod. Daniel quickly stepped forward and carefully helped her. Her body was incredibly light and warm. Even in the cold cabin air, her skin gave off a soft heat. He wrapped a thick thermal blanket around her and helped her sit on the chair beside the table. The alien girl looked at him with wide, curious eyes. She said something quietly. The language sounded soft and musical, but Daniel understood nothing. "Yeah, I don't speak that either," he said with a small smile. The girl looked down at her hands. Thin glowing lines moved gently under her skin, almost like energy flowing through her body. Then suddenly something strange happened. One of Daniel's small metal tools fell from the table and hit the ground with a loud clang. The alien girl jumped in fear, and the moment she panicked, the glowing lines on her arms flashed bright blue. A wave of cold energy moved across the cabin. The metal wall behind Daniel instantly froze with thick crystal ice. Daniel stared in shock. The girl looked just as surprised as he was. Slowly, the glowing light faded again. Neither of them spoke. After a few seconds, Daniel laughed quietly in disbelief. "Well," he said softly, "that's definitely not normal." The girl watched him carefully. Then, very slowly, she reached out her small hand toward him. Daniel hesitated only for a moment before gently shaking it. Her skin felt warm, almost comforting. For the first time since waking up, the alien girl stopped looking afraid. But far above the frozen planet, something dangerous was already beginning. A large patrol ship from the Galactic Authority had just entered the Cryo 7 star system. Inside the command room, officers studied a flashing signal on their scanners. One officer leaned closer to the screen. "Captain," he said seriously, "we just detected something unusual." The captain frowned. "What kind of signal?" The officer's voice became tense. "An ancient alien distress beacon." He paused before finishing his sentence. "And it's coming from the mining zone on Cryo 7, back inside the small cabin." Daniel had no idea that powerful forces were already moving toward the planet. He only looked at the strange alien child sitting across from him and wondered one simple question. Morning never truly arrived on Cryo 7. The frozen planet stayed locked in a permanent gray twilight. Thick clouds covered the sky, and storms of snow moved slowly across the endless white land. Daniel Carter stood near the small window of his mining cabin, staring outside. The alien child was sleeping on the small bed behind him, wrapped tightly in a thermal blanket. During the night she had finally fallen asleep after eating a little warm nutrient soup Daniel had prepared. He still could not believe she was real, an alien child, hidden inside a frozen pod deep under the ice. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. Nothing about the situation made sense, but something else bothered him even more. The mining scanners in his cabin had started picking up strange signals during the night. Small flashes of energy appeared on the screen and then disappeared again. Daniel had checked the equipment 3 times. The machines were working perfectly, which meant the signals were real. He walked toward the console and looked at the display again. The scanner suddenly beeped. A new signal appeared. Daniel frowned. "Ship detected," he whispered. He quickly moved closer to the screen. The radar showed a large object entering the planet's atmosphere. His stomach tightened. Mining ships always sent arrival messages before landing. This ship had not. The scanner zoomed in automatically. A large dark vessel slowly appeared on the display. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat when he saw the symbol on the ship, the Galactic Authority crest. "That's not good," Daniel muttered. The Galactic Authority rarely visited small mining worlds like Cryo 7 unless something serious had happened. Behind him, the alien child suddenly stirred. Daniel turned around. She slowly opened her silver eyes again. For a moment she looked peaceful. Then a deep rumbling sound echoed through the sky outside. The patrol ship passed above the mining area like a massive shadow. The cabin lights flickered. The alien girl immediately sat up in fear. Her glowing skin flashed faintly blue again. She looked toward the sky with wide, terrified eyes. Daniel noticed the fear instantly. Hey, it's okay," he said gently. But the girl began breathing faster. She pointed toward the sky and spoke quickly in her strange language. Daniel could not understand the words. But her fear was clear. She knew that ship, and she was afraid of it. Suddenly the scanner beeped loudly again. Daniel turned back toward the console. Multiple smaller signals appeared on the screen. Drones. The patrol ship had released several scanning drones into the mining zone. "They're searching," Daniel whispered. His mind started racing. If the Galactic Authority discovered the alien child here, everything would change. She would be taken away immediately. Studied, tested, used. Daniel clenched his jaw. He looked back at the girl. She had pulled the blanket around herself and was watching him nervously. Slowly, Daniel walked over and crouched beside her. "I think someone is looking for you," he said quietly. Of course she didn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand his tone. Her small hand reached out and grabbed his sleeve. For a second, Daniel felt something strange. A warm energy moved through his arm. Not painful, just warm. The girl looked into his eyes. Then she gently shook her head. "No," she whispered in her soft alien voice. Daniel didn't know what she meant, but he could feel one thing clearly. She did not want those ships to find her. Outside, the loud buzzing of a drone echoed across the snowfield. Daniel rushed back to the window. A small black drone hovered in the air not far from the cabin, scanning the mining buildings with a red beam of light. Daniel stepped back quickly. "They're already here," he said under his breath. The girl walked beside him and looked out the window too. The moment she saw the drone, her body froze. The glowing lines on her arms suddenly brightened. The room temperature dropped instantly. Frost began forming across the metal walls. Daniel stared at her in shock. "Hey, calm down," he said carefully. The girl looked frightened. Then something incredible happened. The drone outside moved closer. Its scanner beam pointed directly toward the cabin. For a moment, everything became silent. Then the alien girl raised her small hand. A pulse of blue light shot across the room. Outside, the drone suddenly stopped moving. It froze in the air, literally froze. Thick ice rapidly covered its metal body. Then the frozen machine dropped from the sky and crashed into the snow with a heavy thud. Daniel's mouth slowly opened. The girl lowered her hand. The glowing energy faded again. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel whispered one sentence. "Okay, that was definitely not normal." But far above the planet, inside the massive patrol ship, alarms suddenly began flashing. An officer stared at his screen in shock. "Captain, we just lost Drone 7. The captain turned slowly. "What happened?" The officer swallowed. "I don't know. But the last signal came from a miner's cabin in Sector 19. The captain's eyes became cold. "Send a ground team." Back inside the small cabin, Daniel Carter had no idea that heavily armed galactic soldiers were already on their way. The wind outside Daniel Carter's cabin had grown stronger. Snow crashed against the metal walls as the frozen storm moved across the mining zone. The sky above Cryo 7 looked darker than usual, and the distant sound of engines echoed through the cold air. Inside the cabin, Daniel stood completely still. His eyes were fixed on the radar screen. 3 signals were moving across the scanner. 3 Galactic Authority ground vehicles. And they were coming straight toward his location. Daniel slowly ran his hand across his face. "They're coming," he said quietly. The alien child stood beside him. She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. Her silver eyes looked toward the door. She could feel the danger. Daniel began moving quickly around the cabin. His mind was racing now. The frozen drone outside had definitely sent its last signal before crashing. The patrol ship knew exactly where something unusual had happened, which meant they would search the area. And when they did, they would find her. Daniel looked at the small alien girl again. She stood silently near the table, watching him carefully. The soft blue light under her skin glowed gently in the dim room. She looked small, fragile, but Daniel had already seen what she could do. Freezing a flying drone out of the sky was not something any normal child could do. "All right," Daniel whispered to himself. He walked toward the back wall of the cabin and pulled aside a large metal storage shelf. Behind it was a narrow hidden door. Most miners built emergency escape tunnels in case of cave-ins or equipment explosions. Daniel's tunnel connected to an old mining passage that was no longer used. He opened the door and cold air rushed inside. The tunnel beyond was dark and silent. Daniel turned back to the girl and gently motioned with his hand. "Come with me," he said softly. She hesitated for a moment. Then she walked toward him. The moment she stepped into the tunnel, the glowing lines on her arms dimmed slightly, almost like her body was trying to hide its light. Daniel noticed that. Interesting, he thought. Maybe her powers reacted to danger. He handed her a small portable lamp and pointed deeper into the tunnel. "Stay here," he said gently. "Quiet." Of course she didn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand the situation. She nodded slowly. Then she walked deeper into the tunnel and disappeared into the shadows. Daniel closed the hidden door and pushed the metal shelf back into place just as the sound of engines stopped outside the cabin. Heavy footsteps moved through the snow. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he opened the cabin door. 3 Galactic Authority soldiers stood outside wearing heavy combat armor. Their helmets were dark and their rifles were ready. Behind them, a large armored vehicle waited in the snow. One of the soldiers stepped forward. "Daniel Carter?" he asked. Daniel nodded calmly. "That's me." The soldier studied him carefully. "We detected unusual energy activity in this sector," the soldier said. "Our drone crashed near your location." Daniel shrugged slightly. "This planet is full of strange ice storms," he said. "Probably damaged your equipment." The soldiers looked at each other. One of them walked past Daniel and entered the cabin without asking permission. The soldier began scanning the room with a handheld device. Daniel forced himself to remain calm. His heart was beating faster now. If they found the hidden tunnel, everything would be over. The scanning device beeped quietly as the soldier moved it across the walls. Then suddenly the device flashed red. The soldier frowned. "There's energy residue here," he said. The lead officer stepped forward. "What kind?" The soldier studied the screen. His eyes widened slightly. This isn't normal energy." The officer grabbed the scanner and looked at the readings himself. Then his voice became serious. "This is ancient." Daniel felt a chill move through his body. "Ancient?" The officer turned slowly toward Daniel. "Tell me something, Miter," he said carefully. "Have you found anything unusual during your work here?" Daniel shook his head. "Just ice and rocks." The officer stared at him for several seconds. Then suddenly another voice spoke through the soldier's helmet communicator. "Captain to ground team." The officer touched the side of his helmet. "Go ahead." The voice on the radio sounded tense. "We've confirmed the signal source." A pause followed. Then the voice continued. "The energy signature matches records from an extinct alien civilization." The officer's expression changed immediately. "What civilization?" he asked. The answer came quietly. "The Aurelian Empire." Inside the hidden tunnel behind the cabin wall, the alien child suddenly opened her eyes. The glowing lines on her arms began shining brighter. She had heard the name. Back in the cabin, the officer lowered his communicator slowly. His voice was almost a whisper. "The Aurelians were wiped out over 1,000 years ago." The soldier beside him nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." The officer looked around the cabin one more time. Then he said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. "If the signal is truly Aurelian," he turned toward the back wall of the cabin, "then whatever we're looking for is very close." And the soldiers began walking directly toward the hidden tunnel. The soldiers were only a few steps away from the hidden tunnel. Daniel Carter stood near the center of the cabin, trying to keep his face calm. But inside, his mind was racing faster than ever. If they moved that metal shelf, if they opened the hidden door, they would find the alien child. And everything would end right there. The Galactic Authority officer slowly walked toward the back wall of the cabin. His boots made heavy sounds on the metal floor. The scanner in his hand continued to flash with a red warning light. "Energy levels are strongest here," the soldier said. Daniel forced himself to shrug. "Probably old mining equipment behind the wall," he replied. The officer didn't answer. He simply stared at the shelf. For a moment, the room became completely silent. Then suddenly a loud explosion echoed outside. Boom! The entire cabin shook violently. Snow and ice slammed against the metal roof as a powerful storm suddenly crashed into the mining zone. One of the soldiers rushed to the window. "Sir!" he shouted. The ice storm just intensified. Outside, the sky had turned dark gray. Massive winds pushed thick clouds of snow across the ground, making it almost impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. The officer cursed under his breath. "Our vehicles can't operate in this storm," another soldier said. The officer looked frustrated. "We'll continue the search later," he said finally. He turned back toward Daniel. "Do not leave this area," the officer warned. "Authority patrols will return soon." Daniel nodded calmly. Of course. The soldiers quickly left the cabin and disappeared into the blinding snowstorm outside. A few seconds later, the loud engines of their armored vehicle roared as they drove away. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, listening carefully. Finally, the sound of the vehicle faded into the distance. Only the storm remained. Daniel slowly let out a deep breath. "That was close," he whispered. He rushed toward the shelf and pushed it aside. The hidden door opened. The alien child stood quietly inside the tunnel, holding the small lamp. The glowing lines on her arms were brighter now, and her silver eyes looked worried. She had heard everything. Daniel knelt down in front of her. "We can't stay here anymore," he said gently. Even though she didn't understand the words, she seemed to understand the meaning. Danger was coming, and it would return soon. Daniel quickly grabbed a few supplies from the cabin. Thermal blankets, food packs, a portable scanner, and a small plasma cutter. Then he opened a storage locker and pulled out something covered in dust. A mining shuttle keycard. Most miners were not allowed to use shuttles without permission. But Daniel had worked on Cryo 7 long enough to know where the older ships were stored. He looked at the alien girl. "We're leaving this planet." Outside, the storm howled louder. Daniel wrapped the girl in a thick thermal jacket that was far too big for her. The sleeves covered most of her hands, but it would protect her from the deadly cold. Then he opened the cabin door. A wall of freezing wind hit them immediately. The snowstorm was worse than he expected. Visibility was almost zero. But Daniel knew the path. He grabbed the girl's hand and stepped into the storm. The wind screamed across the frozen ground as they moved through the mining zone. Broken machines and empty cargo containers appeared and disappeared in the white darkness. Every step was difficult. The alien girl struggled to walk through the deep snow. After a few minutes, Daniel lifted her onto his back and continued moving forward. "Just a little further," he said through the wind. Finally, a large shape appeared in the storm ahead. The old shuttle bay. The massive metal doors were half buried under ice, but Daniel knew there was still one working ship inside. He reached the control panel and used the plasma cutter to break the frozen lock. Sparks flew as the metal melted. Then the heavy doors slowly creaked open. Inside the dark hangar stood a small mining shuttle, old, rusty, but still operational. Daniel quickly ran inside and sealed the doors behind them. The sudden silence felt strange after the violent storm outside. The alien girl slowly climbed off his back and looked around the large, empty hangar. Her silver eyes moved toward the shuttle. Daniel walked toward the ship and opened the cockpit door. "Let's see if you still work," he muttered. He sat in the pilot's seat and inserted the keycard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly the control panel lights flickered to life. The engines hummed quietly. Daniel smiled. Perfect. But far above the storm clouds, inside the Galactic Authority patrol ship, alarms suddenly began flashing again. An officer looked at the scanner in shock. "Captain, we just detected a shuttle powering up in the mining sector." The captain turned immediately. "Which shuttle?" The officer's voice became tense. "An old mining craft from Hangar 7. The captain narrowed his eyes. "That hangar has been abandoned for years." He paused before giving the order. "Send fighter ships." Back inside the hangar, Daniel helped the alien girl into the passenger seat. The engines of the shuttle began to grow louder. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Daniel grabbed the control stick. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." He had no idea that enemy ships were already descending from space. And they were moving fast. The small mining shuttle roared as its engines pushed against the frozen air of Cryo 7. Inside the cockpit, warning lights blinked across the control panel. The ship was old, and it had not been used for many years. Every vibration of the engines made the metal frame shake slightly. Daniel Carter held the control stick firmly. "Come on. Don't fall apart now," he muttered. Beside him, the alien child sat quietly in the passenger seat. The oversized thermal jacket still covered most of her small body. Her silver eyes watched the controls with curiosity, but there was also fear in them. Outside the cockpit window, the violent snowstorm slowly began to thin as the shuttle climbed higher into the sky. Daniel looked at the altitude display. Almost out of the atmosphere, he said. For the first time since leaving the cabin, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. Maybe they were going to make it, but then the radar screen suddenly beeped loudly. Daniel frowned and looked at the scanner. 3 new signals had appeared, fast-moving signals. His heart sank immediately. Of course, he whispered. 3 Galactic Authority fighter ships were racing toward them through the clouds. The alien girl looked at the radar screen too. She could not understand the symbols, but she could feel the sudden tension inside the cockpit. Daniel quickly pushed the throttle forward. The old shuttle engine screamed louder as the ship tried to accelerate, but the fighters were designed for combat. They were much faster. Within seconds, the 3 ships appeared outside the cockpit window like dark shadows cutting through the sky. A warning alarm echoed through the shuttle. Lock-on detected. Daniel clenched his teeth. One of the fighters moved directly in front of them, blocking their path. A voice suddenly came through the communication system. "Unidentified shuttle, this is Galactic Authority Patrol," the voice said firmly. "You are ordered to stop your engines immediately." Daniel remained silent. The voice continued. "You are carrying an unknown energy source. Power down your ship and prepare to be boarded." Daniel looked at the alien girl. She was staring out the window at the fighter ships surrounding them. Her hands slowly tightened around the edge of her seat. Daniel turned off the communication channel. "They want you," he said quietly. Of course, she could not understand his words. But she understood the danger. The fighter ships moved closer. Another alarm sounded. Weapons charging. Daniel's mind raced. There was no way the old mining shuttle could outrun 3 military fighters. And if they opened fire, the shuttle would not survive. For a moment, Daniel closed his eyes. Then he looked at the girl again. "I'm sorry," he said softly. The alien child tilted her head slightly. Then something strange happened. She slowly unbuckled her seat harness. Daniel noticed immediately. "Hey, stay seated," he said quickly. But she stood up anyway. Her small feet touched the metal floor of the cockpit. Outside, the fighters prepared to fire warning shots. Inside the patrol ship above, officers watched the situation closely. "Captain, weapons are ready," one officer said. "Fire a warning shot," the captain ordered. Back in the shuttle cockpit, Daniel saw the weapon lights charging on the fighter ships. "Not good," he muttered. But the alien child suddenly raised her hand toward the window. Her silver eyes began glowing brighter. Daniel turned toward her. "What are you?" He stopped speaking. The glowing lines under the girl's skin suddenly burned with bright blue light. Energy filled the entire cockpit. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost spread across the windows. The girl's voice whispered something soft and musical in her alien language. Then she opened her hand. A massive wave of blue energy exploded outward from the shuttle. Outside, the fighter ships were hit by the invisible force. In an instant, their engines froze. Thick ice spread across their metal bodies faster than anyone could react. Inside the fighters, pilots shouted in shock as their control panels shut down. "Systems failing! We're losing power!" The ships stopped moving completely, frozen in the air like statues. Then gravity slowly pulled them downward. One by one, the frozen fighters fell through the clouds toward the icy surface below. Inside the patrol command ship above the planet, alarms began flashing everywhere. Officers stared at their screens in disbelief. "Captain, the fighters just lost all power. What caused it?" The captain demanded. The officers swallowed nervously. "We're detecting a massive energy pulse." He paused. "Originating from the mining shuttle." The captain leaned forward slowly. "Impossible. Back inside the small shuttle cockpit, the blue light slowly faded. The alien girl lowered her hand. The glowing lines on her arms dimmed again. Then her body suddenly became weak. She collapsed forward. Daniel quickly caught her before she hit the floor. "Hey," he said worriedly. Her eyes were half closed now. The power she had used had clearly exhausted her. Daniel carefully placed her back in the seat. Outside the cockpit window, the sky was suddenly empty. The fighter ships were gone. Only clouds and stars remained. Daniel stared at the empty sky in shock. Then he looked back at the small alien child. "You just stopped 3 warships," he whispered. Far above them, inside the command ship, the captain watched the scanner carefully. His voice became very serious. "Prepare a message to the Galactic Council." The officer nodded. "What should I report, sir?" The captain's eyes remained fixed on the screen. "Tell them we have located the source." He paused. "And it is far more powerful than we expected." Back inside the shuttle, Daniel had no idea that the entire galaxy was about to learn about the mysterious alien child and the human who was protecting her. The small mining shuttle floated silently in space. The small mining shuttle floated silently in space. Below them, the frozen planet Cryo 7 slowly grew smaller as the ship moved farther away. The violent storms of the icy world were now only white clouds far below. Inside the cockpit, the engines hummed steadily. Daniel Carter sat quietly in the pilot seat. Beside him, the alien child was still unconscious. Her small body rested under a thermal blanket, and the soft blue glow on her skin was faint now, almost like a weak light fading in the dark. Daniel checked the ship's scanner again. His eyes widened slightly. Multiple signals were approaching. Not fighter ships, something much bigger. Several large vessels had appeared on the radar. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. "These aren't patrol ships," he whispered. The symbols on the scanner showed something far more serious. Galactic Council fleet. Daniel had heard stories about them. The Galactic Council controlled peace across thousands of star systems. Their fleets only appeared when something extremely important had happened, which meant one thing. They were here because of the alien child. Before Daniel could react, the shuttle communication system activated. A calm voice filled the cockpit. "Human pilot of mining shuttle K-47. This is the Galactic Council fleet." Daniel looked at the screen. A massive golden ship slowly appeared in front of them. Its surface was covered with glowing symbols from many different alien civilizations. The voice continued. "Please remain calm. Your ship is surrounded, but you are not in danger." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Doesn't feel that way," he muttered. The voice spoke again. "We request that you stop your engines and prepare to dock with our flagship." Daniel looked at the alien girl. She was still sleeping. For a moment he considered trying to escape, but the radar showed at least 10 large ships surrounding them. Running was impossible. Daniel sighed and turned off the engines. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see what they want." Moments later, the small mining shuttle was pulled into the hangar of the massive Council flagship. Bright white lights filled the enormous docking bay. Dozens of alien officers waited near the landing platform. Some were tall with silver skin. Others had glowing eyes or armored bodies. But all of them were staring at the small shuttle. Daniel slowly opened the cockpit door. He carefully picked up the alien child and stepped out of the ship. The moment the officers saw the glowing lines on her skin, the entire hangar fell silent. Several of the alien officers whispered to each other in shock. One tall figure stepped forward. He wore long dark robes marked with golden symbols. Daniel guessed immediately. This was a council leader. The tall alien studied the child carefully. His expression changed the moment he saw her face. "It is true," he said quietly. Another officer spoke nervously. "Is it really her?" The leader nodded slowly. "Yes." He turned his eyes toward Daniel. "Human, do you understand who this child is?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he answered honestly. The leader took a slow breath. "This child belongs to the Aurelian royal bloodline. Several officers lowered their heads respectfully. The Aurelians once protected peace across the galaxy, the leader continued. But their empire was destroyed long ago by powerful enemies. He looked back at the small girl in Daniel's arms. She is the last survivor. Daniel looked down at the child again. The last survivor. That explained why she had been hidden in a frozen pod. She had been protected, saved, hidden from those who wanted her gone. The leader spoke again. Her power is ancient and extremely rare. Many factions in the galaxy would try to control her. The leader stepped closer. For her safety, the Council will take responsibility for her protection. Several officers moved forward carefully. But before they could reach her, something unexpected happened. The alien girl slowly opened her eyes. Her silver gaze looked around the bright hangar. Then she looked up at Daniel. Her small hand grabbed his jacket tightly. She shook her head softly. "No," she whispered. The glowing lines on her arms flickered again, but this time the energy was calm, not angry. Not dangerous, just protective. The entire hangar became quiet again. The Council leader watched this carefully. Then he asked Daniel one simple question. "What do you wish to do, human?" Daniel looked around at the powerful fleet, the alien officers, and the enormous ship surrounding them. Then he looked down at the small alien girl holding onto him. He answered without hesitation. "She's not a weapon," Daniel said firmly. "She's just a child." Silence filled the hangar. The Council leader studied Daniel's face for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. "A rare answer," the leader said. He turned to the other officers. "The child has already chosen who she trusts." Several officers nodded quietly. The leader faced Daniel again. "From this moment forward, the Galactic Council recognizes you as the official guardian of the last Aurelian princess." Gasps spread across the hangar. A simple human miner had just been given one of the greatest responsibilities in the galaxy. Daniel looked down at the girl. She smiled softly for the first time. Far beyond the ship's windows, the stars shined across the endless galaxy. And from that day forward, one story would spread across countless worlds, the story of a lonely human miner who protected the last alien princess and changed the future of the galaxy forever. Below them, the frozen planet Cryo 7 slowly grew smaller as the ship moved farther away. The violent storms of the icy world were now only white clouds far below. Inside the cockpit, the engines hummed steadily. Daniel Carter sat quietly in the pilot's seat. Beside him, the alien child was still unconscious. Her small body rested under a thermal blanket, and the soft blue glow on her skin was faint now, almost like a weak light fading in the dark. Daniel checked the ship's scanner again. His eyes widened slightly. Multiple signals were approaching. Not fighter ships, something much bigger. Several large vessels had appeared on the radar. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. "These aren't patrol ships," he whispered. The symbols on the scanner showed something far more serious. Galactic Council fleet. Daniel had heard stories about them. The Galactic Council controlled peace across thousands of star systems. Their fleets only appeared when something extremely important had happened, which meant one thing. They were here because of the alien child. Before Daniel could react, the shuttle communication system activated. A calm voice filled the cockpit. "Human pilot of mining shuttle K-47. This is the Galactic Council fleet." Daniel looked at the screen. A massive golden ship slowly appeared in front of them. Its surface was covered with glowing symbols from many different alien civilizations. The voice continued. "Please remain calm. Your ship is surrounded, but you are not in danger." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Doesn't feel that way," he muttered. The voice spoke again. "We request that you stop your engines and prepare to dock with our flagship." Daniel looked at the alien girl. She was still sleeping. For a moment he considered trying to escape. But the radar showed at least 10 large ships surrounding them. Running was impossible. Daniel sighed and turned off the engines. "All right," he said quietly. Let's see what they want. Moments later, the small mining shuttle was pulled into the hangar of the massive Council flagship. Bright white lights filled the enormous docking bay. Dozens of alien officers waited near the landing platform. Some were tall with silver skin. Others had glowing eyes or armored bodies. But all of them were staring at the small shuttle. Daniel slowly opened the cockpit door. He carefully picked up the alien child and stepped out of the ship. The moment the officers saw the glowing lines on her skin, the entire hangar fell silent. Several of the alien officers whispered to each other in shock. One tall figure stepped forward. He wore long dark robes marked with golden symbols. Daniel guessed immediately. This was a council leader. The tall alien studied the child carefully. His expression changed the moment he saw her face. "It is true," he said quietly. Another officer spoke nervously. "Is it really her?" The leader nodded slowly. "Yes." He turned his eyes toward Daniel. "Human, do you understand who this child is?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he answered honestly. The leader took a slow breath. "This child belongs to the Aurelian royal bloodline." Several officers lowered their heads respectfully. "The Aurelians once protected peace across the galaxy," the leader continued. "But their empire was destroyed long ago by powerful enemies." He looked back at the small girl in Daniel's arms. "She is the last survivor." Daniel looked down at the child again. The last survivor. That explained why she had been hidden in a frozen pod. She had been protected, saved, hidden from those who wanted her gone. The leader spoke again. "Her power is ancient and extremely rare. Many factions in the galaxy would try to control her." The leader stepped closer. "For her safety, the Council will take responsibility for her protection." Several officers moved forward carefully. But before they could reach her, something unexpected happened. The alien girl slowly opened her eyes. Her silver gaze looked around the bright hangar. Then she looked up at Daniel. Her small hand grabbed his jacket tightly. She shook her head softly. "No," she whispered. The glowing lines on her arms flickered again. But this time the energy was calm, not angry, not dangerous. Just protective. The entire hangar became quiet again. The council leader watched this carefully. Then he asked Daniel one simple question. "What do you wish to do, human?" Daniel looked around at the powerful fleet, the alien officers, and the enormous ship surrounding them. Then he looked down at the small alien girl holding onto him. He answered without hesitation. "She's not a weapon," Daniel said firmly. "She's just a child." Silence filled the hangar. The council leader studied Daniel's face for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. "A rare answer," the leader said. He turned to the other officers. "The child has already chosen who she trusts." Several officers nodded quietly. The leader faced Daniel again. "From this moment forward, the Galactic Council recognizes you as the official guardian of the last Aurelian princess." Gasps spread across the hangar. A simple human miner had just been given one of the greatest responsibilities in the galaxy. Daniel looked down at the girl. She smiled softly for the first time. Far beyond the ship's windows, the stars shined across the endless galaxy. And from that day forward, one story would spread across countless worlds. The story of a lonely human miner who protected the last alien princess and changed the future of the galaxy forever.